Hello, and welcome to Bible Conversations. We appreciate you being a part of our audience today. We're continuing here today, Ron and I, with some things that the Bible mentions that show, as far as what we know today, scientific accuracy. And at the time that these things were written, they were not necessarily well known or even known at that time. So, hope you'll go with us here for the next few minutes. Ron, how are you today? And
Well, I'm doing just very well. We got a little cool snap here. It's March the 17th, 2023, and we're we keep hoping for spring, but it's going to be in the 20s the next 3 nights.
oh, wow.
So, so and things are trying to bloom, but they're going to get bitten
Yeah.
with the frost. But anyway, that's the way it is in the heartland.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm afraid so. Well, Ron, we talked about, some of the things about the earth being round and being a sphere, and talked about how that the earth hangs upon nothing. And boy, that just became so clear to us back when the astronauts first went to the moon. And there it was, that big blue marble hanging out there. Talked about the north being stretched out over an empty space. Talked about lightning and bringing about rain,
Right.
and there's other things, aren't there? We find
Oh
that
yeah.
the scriptures talk about as well life being in the blood,
Yeah,
and
in
yeah,
Leviticus
yeah.
17, it clearly states verses 10 through 14 that the life is in the blood.
So
But if you went to a barber back in 1850 or somewhere like that to make you feel better, they might drain a little blood from you. But that's not what you need. You actually need that blood.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, that even goes back to the oldest of Hebrew scriptures,
Yeah.
and and as you said, I mean, what within just a century ago, uh, it was common to let blood, so that you could let out those diseases, and such as
You
that.
know, Joe, we were talking before about how the medical books and science books and stuff have changed in the last 100 years. And I remember visiting with a fella in El Dorado, Kansas, that collected old medical textbooks. And I was looking through some of them, and it is hilarious what they used to advocate medically uh, 100, 200 years ago. And you'd read those and you think, man, it's a wonder anybody lived after seeing a doctor,
Yeah, yeah. And then even like in Acts, and that's back there, well, in Genesis 9, speaks of it, but then Leviticus speaks of it as well. Beginning there in the 11th chapter, people want to go and read that. And then in Acts chapter 17, when Paul was preaching there in Athens, and talking about that there's one creation, and one humanity. And he says even there that all humans can interchange and share blood. They're all of one blood.
Yeah, that's Acts 17, verse 26. If someone wants to look at that, that he has made of one blood all nations upon on the earth. And it wasn't so long ago that people thought that if you transferred blood from one race to another race, it would change a person's race. And the Apostle Paul, back before 60 AD, what was that, about 50, 57 AD, something like that, preached that there's one, everybody's of one blood.
Yeah. And uh, you look at as well, like under the old law for the Israelites, and God even talks about diseases of the nations around them. Some of those had to do with uh, things that are natural occurrences by people not living the way that God calls upon us to live. But nonetheless, he talks about there how that a person with leprosy was to cover their face and their nose, cover their mouth and their nose. And so they would wear a veil, and they would cry out unclean. With the Israelites as well, touching a dead body and touching certain things that considered them to be unclean is, to us interesting in the sense that at the time, maybe it was just thought of as far as religiously, unclean. And there was certainly an element to that God wanted to show, to help to illustrate sinfulness and, practices that we, humans might have and such that are not proper before God, not righteous. And so they would be unclean, but truly in the sense of germs and infections. It was only back in the 1950s, and they discovered this in wards where women were delivering babies, that they learned that the benefit of the doctors washing their hands between patients. And, today we're like, yeah, scrub those hands and such, but it's not that long ago. I mean, that's less than 100 years ago that even doctors examining patients from one patient to another were actually transferring diseases because they hadn't washed and hadn't cleansed. And yet, God, in that spiritual idea of uncleanness, he also called upon them, to wash up and to wash their hands. And
we might just mention, Joe, that's Leviticus chapters 11 through 14. And if you want to go over and read those, they had isolation for certain communicable diseases. If a person had an issue of blood, had open sores and stuff, they were supposed to stay away from people until they could get well. And it, well beyond or well before their time, they're having these health and sanitation laws. The dietary laws that God gave them are better. We're not under dietary laws today like they were then. We're not under that law. But if you follow their dietary laws, you're going to be healthier, undoubtedly. The thing about pork, if it's not cooked properly and thoroughly, is harmful. And I think that was one of the reasons why God told them they shouldn't eat any pork, because it'd be unclean to them, because they didn't thoroughly cook things sometimes. But anyway, that's my speculation. That's Griffin's commentary right there. But that was the law. God gave.
That's right. And those were things, that actually, help keep them healthy and help keep diseases from, being communicated from one person to another. God also, and trying to illustrate to Abraham the promises that he made to him over in Genesis chapter 15, he said, look at the stars. He said, if you can count the number of stars, then you would know. I know he doesn't say it just like this, but you would know how many people would actually be blessed, from your lineage. And yet God said there, but they are innumerable. But people were able to count the number of stars in the sky, even, back at that time. Now,
which some philosopher, a Greek philosopher, Hipparchus, maybe.
I think
had
the fifth
laid out one
BC.
night and he counted, and he said there couldn't be more than 300 stars. And if you try to count them, but if you look at, I think it's Genesis 13, verse 16, he says the number of stars is like the dust of the earth. If you can count the grains of the sand, count the stars, and we know that's innumerable. So it wasn't until the invention of the telescope that people were beginning to realize that the stars were innumerable. Of course, today we have a whole lot more powerful ways of seeing the expanding universe. And we talked before, we didn't really talk about that aspect, but when we talked about that God hangs the earth upon nothing, he stretches this, the universe is ever expanding, and it's a completely expanding universe, and
Yeah.
scripture even mentions that.
Now, as well as Job and, as Solomon and Ecclesiastes demonstrating kind of how, life repeats itself in generation after generation. But he illustrated that by talking about, how that the waters run a circuit. And then Job, he talks about how that the rain comes from vapors, and uh, uh, learning then, how rain, is formed in the clouds, and that it's, from the vapors of the earth. That wasn't, fully comprehended.
Right, right.
And I
Yeah,
like,
it was. I just checked my notes. It was Hipparchus in 150 BC that
okay,
said there couldn't be
150.
more than 3,000 stars. Ptolemy uh, counted 1,056 stars, said there couldn't be more than 3,000. That was in 150 AD. And so that was 300 years later. And Galileo was the first to use a telescope in 1608 to say that the stars were innumerable.
Yeah.
But why would, again, we're just talking about, we're saying we want to keep emphasizing the Bible is not a scientific book. It doesn't claim to be a scientific book, but the Creator has told us how he created things in
Yeah.
certain ways, and well beyond when what we have today is modern science. And there's no telling what we haven't discovered yet.
Mm-hmm.
That the Bible reveals to us. We just don't understand it because we haven't discovered it yet. People didn't understand the earth was round. They didn't understand the earth was hung upon nothing. They didn't understand the empty space over the north and all of that until we discovered it. And then they realized, oh, the Bible says it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to
and if
cut you
these are
off
just
there.
the writings of men, why doesn't,
Yeah.
why wouldn't God just ask Job, have you seen that great turtle that the earth rests upon its back?
Yeah.
Or something like, and, and it is penned by men, but it is inspired by God. The information that men wrote, this information that God, provided them. And if it was just written by men, not only, by using them as an instrument, but by their own thinking and by their own knowledge, uh, when they illustrated things and asked questions about, things among the universe, or when God wanted to illustrate to Abraham, just, the significance of the promise that he was making him, and how many offspring that he would have. Why choose, uh, innumerable, and why choose the stars to illustrate that, when
Exactly.
people counted that type of thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
The style of the Bible
Mhm.
is unlike the way men write. Uh, when you consider the volumes that have been written about men, human leaders, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Winston Churchill, Amelia Earhart, uh, things that have been written about people who have been celebrities or well known, movies that have been. The Bible doesn't do that. It doesn't write all these volumes about it. The creation of the world and humanity. There's 2 chapters in Genesis, first 2 chapters of Genesis, and the flood covers 3 chapters. Imagine if men had written about the flood.
Yeah, yeah.
What
And
all they would have written.
that just comes from our natural kind of curiosity. We're always wanting to know more, than what the Bible even reveals to us. And we're like, why does it tell these events in that manner? And then it just ends there.
Yeah. The life of Christ found in 4 short books. And I'm reminded of what John wrote uh, in John, well, the last verse of the Gospel of
Yeah, yeah,
John, John 21, verse 25.
yeah,
And
yeah,
also, there are also many other things Jesus did, which, if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. And that's the way men write,
yes,
you know,
yeah,
and the Bible doesn't do that. Why? It's because it just states things.
yeah, yeah,
And it does it succinctly, doesn't try to tell every aspect of everything. So uh, you compare that again with all the writings of men and the impartiality of the writers.
yeah. I mean, if I was going to write about my own life, I can guarantee you there's some things that's not going to be in that book. you know?
Well,
but when God writes the book, then look out. Nothing's held back on Joe.
exposés are something it's fairly a recent phenomena. If you read
Yeah,
all the biographies of people written years ago, they
yeah,
tended to leave out the frailties of
yeah.
people.
Yeah, and
The
especially
Bible
if you
doesn't
go
do
into an
that.
autobiography, I
Yeah,
mean, even
yeah,
still, some people still write some things in their autobiographies, but uh, that's not probably as much to tell the story as it is to sell the book.
yeah,
And
yeah.
uh, so, yeah, I mean, it's just
But you,
amazing. It's
but the
writing
main
style.
heroes of the Bible, like David, a man after God's own heart, and yet it told about it, his adultery and other things that he did. And
Yeah,
of course, he did some great things too, as a man of great faith. Abraham, he did some things and lied and some things. It shows us the frailty, the humanity
yeah,
of people, but it also shows us the righteousness of them
yeah.
and how that they were people of faith.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things that I've have come across sometimes in studies with individuals. Once they start really getting into and wanting to learn more about the scriptures, wanting to know more about what they need to be about in their relationship with God and such, that they read these things and they go, well, I can't believe that these people did that. I thought Abraham was a great man,
Mm-hmm.
but he lied and
Mm-hmm.
and like I said, about whether it's of David or Samuel was such a great man, and yet he didn't do a great job with raising his own sons, and and people are kind of stunned by that, and they're like, I thought these people, well, what do you think yourself? I mean, that's what this reveals to us. This is that God is working with broken people,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's why he works with us.
That's
uh,
right.
we know our brokenness well, and it's known to God, and God shows us, no, I work with that as well. In fact,
Yeah.
that's kind of his specialty.
But
It,
something else that makes the Bible special is though it does teach a moral standard that you don't find in the writings of humanity. Uh, it teaches us how to treat one another, teaches us how to live under our governments. It teaches us how to live in our family relationships, the marital relationship, the parent-child relationship, the child-parent relationship. It gives us a standard of living that is above anything that people of our humanity's ever written. And of course, a lot of people take exception to some of that in the Bible because
mhm.
they don't want to live that way.
Well, and that's part of the point of, well, who would write such a moral code when we are more about, well, but if I am stronger or more powerful or smarter or wealthier than someone else, why shouldn't I be able to use that? Why shouldn't I be able to take advantage of others with that? And and why would people write a moral code like that when we know that the allurement, the temptation is to give us excuse to treat others badly, or, why would we ever even say something about, treating someone even as we would want to be treated. And
Right.
if, if, if there's not a God, to be accountable to.
And
So,
and to be a Christian, to be a true Christian, following what the scriptures teach on how to be a Christian, one cannot be a racist.
mhm,
You cannot be a racist and call yourself Christian. The Apostle Paul makes it very clear, Galatians 3:28, there's neither male nor female, neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free. We're all one in Christ. And anyone that is a misogynist or a racist, bigot, they can't call themselves Christian. It's not following the teachings of Jesus Christ. And that alone is something very unique, because people tend to be tribal and always have been. You go back to most uncivilized people and follow it on through history, people are tribal. But Jesus taught something better. And no wonder he was called the Prince of Peace. If people would
yeah,
just
yeah,
follow his teaching,
yeah,
we would have peace.
yeah. And, and I think as well that even under the old law, there was much of that. I mean, sometimes people go, well, the God under that Old Testament, he was,
Yeah.
and maybe Jesus came and kind of settled him down or something like that.
Yeah.
No, a lot of that was, and that's what, I think Jesus addressed, even like in his Sermon on the Mountain. He says, you got a lot of this wrong. Your teachers have taught you things that are influenced by their own desires and by, their own wishes and what they would, even rather have themselves. I mean, even under the old law, they, they, they were to be, mindful of those that were inferior in some way to them. They
Yeah.
were they were to treat with kindness, the stranger even that would come through their land. Now,
Exactly.
yes, as they came into a land for the children of Israel that was also as a nation, they are civil, order as well as a religious order, that there are certain things that you have to, recognize civilly. So, the stranger, if he comes and lives in your land, you treat him well, you treat him nice, you treat compassion. You've been a stranger yourself, and in a foreigner's land. Uh, but they are going to have to live according to, the laws that I call upon you to live by as well, type of thing. But that wasn't creating, like you said, racism. That wasn't creating, classes of people, to think of themselves as being better than others. What it was doing was, you know, the same kind of moral concerns toward one another, but also a recognition of doing what is right before God.
Yeah, you have to understand what was going on when God gave the children of Israel the land of Canaan, what that was all about. And it was setting up the Messiah. And
Yeah.
people look at a lot of things in the Old Testament with tunnel vision, not seeing the whole picture. And
Mhm.
we started out these videos talking about the necessity to see the whole picture. You got to put all the pieces in together and see the overall picture, not just one piece at a time.
That's right. Well, Ron, I hope that we've been able to communicate to anybody watching, that this is one of the reasons why that we think that it's actually, you know, reasonable and it's actually logical to look at the Bible as a means of, you know, concluding whether or not there is a God or not, and who this God is that, that we believe in and that we recognize. The Bible, it's quite reasonable to look at it and hold it to, this account, or allow its holding itself to the account of being accurate, being true, throughout time. I mean, even its history, people, and there is the need to challenge, the scriptures. I mean, they are calling telling us that this is God written and God inspired and such as that. And we need to have confidence, that it is that. But, but, as we then look at it, we see, well, this does give us true history. And so when people challenge like the history of it and said, well, we don't have any evidence, of these people ever existing. And then we find out, well, yeah, we do,
Yeah.
time, time will often come to show through archaeology, which then not only finds potteries and engravings and things like that, but even finds literature that we think, that we didn't have to tell us the same history that the
Yeah, a
scriptures
lot of
tell us.
some of the critics, archaeological critics and others have talked about, the Bible talks about the Hittite nation. They said there's no evidence there ever was a Hittite nation. That was as recent as about 1950. And then they found in an archaeological dig a reference to the Hittite people. King David is another one. They didn't find that until what, 1999?
Yeah. To know.
Before they found the evidence that David, King David in Israel, was a real person. But before that, they would say, well, he was some kind of a mythical
Mythological
yeah,
figure, hero.
someone that, right, someone they invented as a hero, kind of like we do with Superman or Batman or something
Yeah.
like that. But he was real. He was a real king, and they found it outside of the history of Israel. Right.
Right.
It, right.
Found it in these foreign lands, that had their own records and
Exactly.
mentioning, people that are spoken of, and had been, as far as our history, only in the scriptures. And then we find out, no, they had influence outside of that nation, outside of
Exactly.
Israel, outside of that land, even.
Yeah.
So
Google some of that if you're really interested in seeing it.
yeah. Well, we have some more that we want to talk about, but hopefully what we've done is we've given you, the confidence to believe that this is the mind of God, that God has inspired this and that God has revealed it. So we want to move on. We want to talk about how that we can understand it. Is it understandable, or is it written only, for an elite few, or do you have to have, this extensive, educational background in order to be able to know just exactly what it says, or has God left its understanding and its meaning, only to a particular few or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll be able to demonstrate that you can look into the Word of God, and it's not going to be anything that's unique just to it, but it's actually just the way that we communicate, the way people communicate and write even today. You have any closing thoughts there, Ron?
Well, we might also in the very near future talk about how to study the Bible. That just rules of putting it all together. Like you said, we can understand it. Sometimes you have to understand an approach to Bible study.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully, this has been beneficial for us. It has for us anyway. We enjoy going over these things again and be surprised, even as we go over things that we are familiar with, that what we gain and what we learn in the knowledge of it. But not only that, there's plenty that we do not yet know. Hope you'd continue along with us in our conversations of the Bible.